Welcome back to Newsmax Now. New swing state poll is out today, and it is potentially devastating for the Hillary Clinton campaign as well as Democrats. For more on this and her latest column in the Washington Examiner, we have investigative reporter Sarah Westwood joining us. Sarah, good to see you again.
Good to see you.
All right, Quinnipiac asked voters about how Hillary Clinton stacks up against her GOP rivals in three key swing states: Colorado, Iowa, and Virginia. And it turns out Jeb Bush, Marco Rubio, and Scott Walker all beat the former Secretary of State in those swing states. Are you surprised by this? Because Mrs. Clinton has been polling pretty well up against most of her GOP rivals.
Right. This is the first time we've seen in a significant national poll Hillary Clinton trailing the GOP frontrunners in hypothetical matchups. And it's interesting, especially to see her trailing in Virginia, considering she's expected to do well in that state. One of her confidants is the governor of that state, Governor Terry McAuliffe. He's expected to help deliver that state for her. So to see Walker, Rubio, and Bush hold such commanding leads outside the margin of error in some cases in some of those swing states is promising for Republicans because, you know, it's been seen as an uphill battle up until now.
Yeah, sure. Terry McAuliffe has a long history with the Clintons. Of course, that assumes that she wins the Democratic primary, and that doesn't appear to be in question just yet. But as some like to say, she is feeling the burn, as in Bernie Sanders. That same poll may spell some bad news for Donald Trump, and it would be really kind of the first poll to do so. When asked about the GOP candidate's favorability, he's not in the lead of this poll. Ben Carson came in first in terms of favorability, followed by Marco Rubio and Scott Walker. Hillary Clinton, Trump, and Chris Christie all were in the bottom of the pack. How much is this going to impact everyone's decision? Because if you look at the other polls, Donald Trump is right up there at the lead.
Right, and Donald Trump has held such a commanding lead here at the beginning of the primary, but it's important to keep in mind that for right now, Donald Trump has the biggest name recognition, and that's part of why he's polling so high. You know, Trump is a household name. Scott Walker isn't necessarily a name that people recognize at this point in the campaign, but they will later on. And at that point, the frontrunners will be able to start pulling away from Donald Trump when you get down to the question of who are you going to vote for, not just who you view more favorably or these other peripheral questions. And eventually, the RNC and other Republican establishment types are hoping that he'll sort of fade into the background.
Well, you make a good point there. He does have the name recognition, but he does seem to also be tapping into some feelings that never really went away during the Tea Party revolution as well. Now, we also want to take a look at who's gained the most ground and who's lost the most over the last week. When we look at a composite poll from Real Clear Politics and the movement over the last week, our three biggest winners: Donald Trump up 7.2%, Scott Walker up a point and about a half, Ted Cruz up nearly a half a point. The biggest losers: Jeb Bush, Ben Carson, and Marco Rubio. What is dragging those guys down?
Well, for Ben Carson and Marco Rubio, you know, you haven't really seen them in the headlines as much. They launched their campaign some time ago. You always see candidates, or almost always see candidates, receive a boost in their poll numbers right when they jump in the race. Scott Walker just recently entered, so we know that he's still sort of riding that wave of being a new entry into the race. And at the same time, you know, Jeb Bush more and more is being sort of held back by his ties to the establishment, and that was sort of reinforced when his fundraising numbers came out and he had such a huge haul among the Republican donors. And for some voters, especially the same ones that are responding to Trump's rhetoric, those are the ones that are a little bit wary of, first of all, electing another Bush, and second of all, electing someone who has such close ties to the establishment Republicans that they're sort of frustrated with right now.
All right, a while back we played a soundbite from Scott Walker, not really wanting to answer the gay marriage question. Now we have a new Gallup poll as well. It shows support for gay marriage in the U.S. has remained at or about the same ever since the Supreme Court ruling. And also, you're taking a look at Scott Walker here, saying some interesting things in your column about the use of force around the world. Quote, "In terms of the use of force, there has to be a high standard." Walker told the Examiner, "I think there should be a high bar, and it shouldn't be about nation building or being the world's policeman. It should be about protecting our national security interests." So Scott Walker taking a look inward towards the United States. Is this going to be a winning strategy for him?
Well, certainly he's trying to thread the needle between the sort of hawkish conservative id that sort of just wants to go out there and fight ISIS and sees these threats around the world and immediately wants to respond with force, and at the same time understanding that there's some latent frustration with the Bush era of going into states like Iraq and the sort of nation building efforts that were done there that sort of had a protracted U.S. presence overseas that wasn't seen as positive, and then in fact turned a lot of voters off and helped give rise to Obama's election in 2008. So that's something that Walker is conscious of to feed both sides of the party. He's seeking to be the consensus candidate, as you know.
Yeah, as
so
you mentioned, it is a
that's
very
reflected in his policy.
There's a very small eye in that need. It'll be difficult for him to do. Sarah Westwood, always great to see you.
You too.
All right, coming up next, headlines and punchlines.
Thank you very much for being here. Here's what everyone is talking about, everybody. Donald Trump is still the headline today. This is unbelievable. It's just a gift that keeps on giving.
Jimmy Fallon had to say about the Donald right after this.